Bathed in the glow of Earth's gleaming skyline, the towering ultramarine stands motionless, his ancient ceramite armor bearing scars from 10,000 years of unending war. The primitive humans below scatter like insects, unaware that their reality has been forever marked by his arrival. Behind his emotionless helm, Brother Titus calculates the corruption potential of a world that welcomes Xenos as heroes. But as the veil between dimensions grows thin, and whispers of the warp seep into mortal minds, one question burns brighter than faith itself. Will this world's champions stand with humanity's grim defender, or will they become the very heresy he was born to purge? Debris fell like burning tears from a sky that bled crimson. Brother Titus Valens of the Ultramarine's second company stared upward through his damaged helmet, auto-senses struggling to filter the apocalyptic data flooding his systems. The battle barge Oath of Moment hung in low orbit, its massive hull breached in 17 places where the Chaos warship Vindictus Derelictus had rammed it. Void shields flickered like dying fireflies as the two Leviathans disgorged their warriors into the void. "Emperor, preserve us," Titus whispered, his Vox transmitter crackling with interference. Around him, the agri world of Caspian IV burned. What had begun as a routine compliance verification had transformed into catastrophe when the Chaos warband emerged from the immaterium without warning. The ruinous powers had timed their attack perfectly, catching the Ultramarine's complement scattered across the planet's surface. Titus checked his bolter's ammunition counter. 3 rounds remained. His combat knife was notched, and his power armor's right pauldron had been shattered by a Chaos champion's thunderhammer. Blood, both his and that of his enemies, coated his ceramite plate in a grotesque painting of devotion and sacrifice. "Brother Titus, fall back to extraction point Primus." The voice of Sergeant Agerman cut through. "The static. The warp rift is expanding. The Vindictus is attempting to summon something through." "Confirmed, Brother Sergeant," Titus replied, turning toward the extraction coordinates displayed on his helm's tactical overlay. Behind him, the screams of the dying farmers of Caspian IV faded into the background roar of bolter fire and demonic howls. Guilt flared within him briefly, before training reasserted itself. The mortals were lost. The threat to the Imperium took priority. He began to run, each thunderous step of his power armor crushing the fertile soil of what had been, mere hours ago, a productive agri-field. Now it was a graveyard. Ahead, a plume of blue smoke marked the extraction point where a Thunderhawk gunship would descend to retrieve the surviving Astartes. The warp rift pulsed above, a cancerous wound in reality that spread with each passing second. Through his enhanced vision, Titus could see it a tear in the material universe that revealed glimpses of the howling immaterium beyond. Lightning of impossible colors spilled from its edges, striking the planet below with reality-warping force. "Brother Sergeant," Titus voxed, "the anomaly is expanding faster than projected. I may not reach extraction in time." Static answered him. "Then, the Emperor protects, Brother Titus. Continue to extraction point Delta instead, Thunderhawk inbound." Titus adjusted his course, pushing his transhuman body to its limits. A small group of cultists appeared from behind a burning hab unit, their bodies twisted by unholy mutations. Titus did not slow. His last 3 bolter rounds found their marks in eye sockets and exposed throats. Then the massive space marine was among them, his combat knife rising and falling with mechanistic precision. He felt ribs crack beneath his ceramite boots as he pushed onward. The sky split further. The warp rift's diameter had doubled in the 38 seconds since he had last measured it. Mathematical projections scrolled across his helm's display, and Titus felt a rare sensation: doubt. The extraction point would be consumed before he reached it. A bolt of impossible energy struck the ground 20 meters ahead, carving a perfect circle in reality. The soil, the very atoms that comprised it, simply ceased to exist. In their place, a swirling vortex of warp energy manifested a localized portal generated by the larger rift above. Titus skidded to a halt, searching for an alternative route. His enhanced mind calculated trajectories, probabilities, survival rates. None were favorable. "Emperor, guide me," he whispered, though no Vox channel remained to carry his words. The portal pulsed hungrily. Behind Titus, the sound of demonic laughter grew closer. Ahead, only the unknown maw of the warp waited. Neither choice offered survival, but one offered the chance to deny chaos a kill. Titus Valens, son of Ultramar, warrior of the Emperor, made his choice. He charged forward, bolter raised in defiance, directly into the swirling vortex. The warp energies caressed his armor, seeking ingress, testing for weakness in his faith and his gene-forged flesh. His mind filled with whispers of power, of glory, of salvation from his duty. He rejected them all. "I am his will made manifest," Titus roared into the void as reality bent around him. "I am vengeance. I am duty." The universe twisted. Colors that did not exist in the material realm washed over him. Time stretched and compressed simultaneously. Titus felt his consciousness pulled apart into threads, then rewoven into patterns that defied comprehension. Then blackness, silence, peace, and finally impact. Concrete shattered beneath him as Titus crashed into what felt like solid ground. His armor's systems, which had gone completely dark during transit, flickered back to life one by one. Damage reports scrolled across his helm's display. Power reserves at 37%, respiratory filtration compromised, Vox systems offline. Titus rose to one knee, bolter raised instinctively, and surveyed his surroundings. He had landed in the middle of a wide street, paved with some form of crude rockcrete. Structures of glass and steel rose on either side, their designs unfamiliar but clearly the product of human architecture. Primitive ground vehicles had stopped, their operators staring at him with expressions of shock and fear. This was not Caspian IV. It was not any Imperial world he recognized. A quick diagnostic of his armor's chronometer revealed it had reset during transit. Titus had no way of knowing how long he had been in the warp, or where and when he had emerged. The civilians definitely human, Titus confirmed, as his autosenses analyzed their biological signatures began to flee. Their panicked screams filled the air, a reaction Titus had witnessed countless times when mortals first encountered the Adeptus Astartes. Even loyal Imperial citizens often reacted with fear before awe when confronted with a space marine. "Be at peace," Titus said, his external vox crackling but functional. "I am a servant of the Imperium. Identify your world and your governor." Their terror only intensified. Strange symbols adorned the buildings and vehicles, not Imperial aquillas or the markings of any known Forge world. The architecture lacked the Gothic grandeur of Imperial construction. No statues of the Emperor or his primarchs watched over these streets. A disturbing possibility formed in Titus's mind. Either he had been cast to some distant, non-compliant human world, or his thoughts were interrupted as his armor's auspex detected approaching aircraft. 3 small vehicles approached at high speed, their design unlike any Imperial flyer he had encountered. They descended rapidly, taking up positions that effectively surrounded him. From one of the craft, a voice amplified by some crude Vox system called out, "Attention, unidentified hostile. This is SHIELD. You are surrounded. Power down your weapons and surrender immediately." Titus analyzed the term. SHIELD. No known Imperial organization or Forge World designation matched. The craft carried primitive projectile weapons, easily identified by his armor's threat assessment protocols. Their design suggested a technological level far below Imperial standard, perhaps equivalent to late Age of Terror weaponry. A non-compliant human world, then. Perhaps one that had somehow escaped the Imperium's notice for millennia, or had regressed after losing contact during Old Night. "I am Brother Titus Valens of the Ultramarine Second Company," he responded, lowering his bolter slightly but not relinquishing it. "I serve the God Emperor of mankind and the Imperium of man. I mean no harm to loyal subjects of the throne. The response came swiftly, final warning. Power down and surrender, or we will open fire. Titus assessed his options. He was alone on an unknown world with limited ammunition and damaged armor. While he could certainly destroy these primitive craft, doing so would serve no tactical purpose and might eliminate valuable sources of information. Additionally, the Codex Astartes provided clear guidance on interaction with lost human colonies. Initial contact should prioritize information gathering over compliance enforcement when operating without proper imperial authority. "I will comply temporarily," Titus said, magnetizing his bolter to his thigh plate. "But know that I answer only to the Emperor and my chapter." The aircraft remained in position as a ground vehicle approached larger than the civilian transports, armored, though still primitive by imperial standards. From it emerged humans in black tactical gear carrying projectile weapons. Their body language betrayed professional training, though nothing approaching the discipline of even the lowest ranks of the Imperial Guard. One stepped forward, weapon raised. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Titus almost laughed at the absurdity of the command. His armor alone weighed several hundred kilograms. The servos and machine spirits that allowed him to move with lethal grace could not easily be positioned as the human demanded. More importantly, no space marine would willingly assume such a vulnerable posture before unconfirmed authorities. "I cannot comply with that specific request," Titus stated, his voice emotionless. "My armor's design makes such a position impossible. I will, however, remain stationary and non-hostile while we establish diplomatic contact." The humans conferred quickly among themselves, their voices too low for even Titus's enhanced hearing to catch over the idling engines of their vehicles. Finally, the apparent leader spoke again. "We're going to escort you to a secure facility. Any hostile movement will be met with immediate response. Do you understand?" "Understood," Titus replied. "Lead, and I shall follow." As the humans arranged their escort formation, Titus activated his armor's data logging function. Every observation, every word, every detail of this strange world would be recorded for eventual transmission to his chapter, should he find a way to return. The Codex Astartes dedicated 17 full pages to protocols for Astartes, isolated on non-compliant worlds. Titus had memorized them all. For now, he would observe. He would gather intelligence. He would evaluate the spiritual corruption of this world and determine if its people could be brought into the Emperor's light, or if they were too far gone. And he would search for a way home back to the endless war that was his purpose and his sacred duty. The black vehicles formed a convoy around him as he walked, their engines straining to match the pace of even his measured steps. Above, the aircraft maintained their vigilant positions. Civilians lined the streets at a distance, recording his passage with small devices that Titus's autosenses identified as primitive picked capturers. This world had no idea what had just arrived on their doorstep. They had no concept of the Imperium, of the constant war against Xenos and Chaos, of the sacrifice demanded of humanity across the galaxy. They would learn. In the fortified operations center deep beneath the streets of New York City, Director Nick Fury stood with his arms crossed, staring at the multiple screens displaying the armored giant currently being escorted through a specialized containment airlock. "Tell me again what we're dealing with," Fury said, his single eye fixed on the largest monitor. Maria Hill, his second in command, consulted her tablet. "Unknown entity, approximately 8 feet tall in blue armor that our sensors can barely penetrate. Appeared in Midtown in what witnesses described as a hole in reality similar to the Einstein-Rosen bridge events in New Mexico, but with different energy signatures. Identified himself as Brother Titus Valens of something called Ultramarines. References to an Emperor and an Imperium. Another Asgardian?" Fury asked. "Negative. Dr. Foster's readings don't match the Bifrost pattern. And the language patterns are different. He's speaking English, but with terminology that doesn't match any known organization or mythology." Hill swiped through more data on her screen. "Preliminary scans show the armor is unlike anything we've seen. Power source unidentifiable. Weapons technology advanced but not consistent with Stark, Hammer, or any known terrestrial or extraterrestrial design we've encountered. Fury nodded slowly. Where's our response team? Stark is inbound, ETA 3 minutes, Rogers is already on site, Banner is standing by if needed, but we're keeping him in reserve given the population density. Thor is off-world. Romanoff and Barton are positioning for containment support. And our guest? Compliant so far, no resistance during transport. But sir, Hill paused, selecting a specific image on her tablet and enlarging it for Fury to see. Look at these markings on the armor. The image showed stylized human skulls, strange double-headed eagle symbols, and what appeared to be religious iconography integrated into the armor's design. Some kind of cult, Fury mused. If it is, it's not one we've ever encountered. The symbolism doesn't match any known extremist group or religion. Fury turned as the door to the operations center slid open, admitting Dr. Eric Selvig. The scientist looked tired, his hair disheveled, but his eyes were bright with the excitement of new discovery. Director Fury, Selvig said, barely containing his enthusiasm. The readings are fascinating. The energy signature around our visitor has quantum patterns similar to those I detected during my work on the Tesseract, but with harmonic variances that suggest English. Dr. Fury interrupted. Is he a threat? Selvig blinked. Oh. Well, potentially. The energy residue suggests he traveled through some kind of dimensional tear, not unlike what we theorized could exist beyond the boundaries of our observable universe. If he's from another dimension entirely. Another dimension, Fury repeated flatly. Like the Chitauri? No. Selvig shook his head emphatically. The Chitauri came through a doorway we opened. This is different. It's as if he tore through the fabric of reality itself, and the tear may not be fully closed. Fury's expression darkened. Meaning? Meaning? Selvig said gravely. Where one came through, others could follow. Or worse, whatever exists in the space between dimensions could find the tear and come through as well. Fury turned back to the monitors. The armored giant now stood in a reinforced containment chamber, motionless, his helmet turning slightly as he examined his surroundings. Despite his earlier compliance, everything about the figure radiated lethal potential. Hill, full containment protocols. I want triple the standard security detail. And get Stark and Rogers in here now. If our visitor decides to stop playing nice, I want to be ready. On the screen, the armored giant turned his helmet directly toward the primary camera. Though his face was hidden behind his visor, the movement conveyed a chilling awareness. He knew he was being watched. And he was watching back. Titus stood motionless in the center of the containment chamber, conducting a methodical evaluation of his surroundings. The room was circular, approximately 12 meters in diameter, with walls of some reinforced material that his autosenses could not immediately identify. Observation devices, primitive by imperial standards, but functional, were positioned at regular intervals around the perimeter. His armor's machine spirit had stabilized, self-repair protocols addressing the minor damage sustained during his arrival. Power levels remained at 37%, sufficient for immediate combat needs but concerning for long-term operations. His bolter contained no remaining ammunition, though the weapon itself could still serve as an effective bludgeon if necessary. Titus activated his armor's atmospheric sampling system. The air was breathable but contained high levels of pollutants consistent with an industrialized world that had not yet implemented proper atmospheric scrubbers. Biological scans detected only human life signs in the surrounding facility, no evidence of Xenos contamination, at least not in his immediate vicinity. Brother Titus Valens. A voice emerged from hidden Vox speakers. My name is Director Nick Fury. I represent the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division. We have some questions for you. Titus turned toward the primary observation port, where his autosenses detected the highest concentration of surveillance equipment. I will answer what I can, though I must warn you that certain information is restricted by the dictates of my chapter and the Adeptus Astartes. A brief silence followed. Then, you appeared in the middle of Manhattan in what our scientists described as a dimensional tier. Where are you from, and what is your purpose here? I am from Macragge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines chapter. My immediate presence here was unintentional. I was engaged in combat against forces of chaos on the agri-world Caspian IV when a warp rift manifested. I was drawn through the immaterium and deposited here. Another pause. Those terms mean nothing to us. Explain in plain language. Titus processed this response with growing concern. Not only did these humans lack knowledge of the Imperium, but they seemed unfamiliar with even the most basic aspects of galactic reality. The terms chaos, warp, and even Macragge elicited no recognition. Your world is not part of the Imperium of Man? Titus asked, though he already knew the answer. There is no Imperium here. This is Earth, the United States of America to be specific. Earth, the ancient birthworld of humanity. The cradle of mankind, where the Emperor himself had walked during the Age of Terror before the Great Crusade united the scattered human worlds. But that had been millennia ago. Earth now was Holy Terra, seat of the Golden Throne, heart of the Imperium, unless... A dark possibility formed in Titus's mind. The warp was not merely a means of interstellar travel, it existed outside normal space and time. Stories existed of ships that entered the immaterium, only to emerge centuries before they departed, or in places that should have been impossible to reach. What year is it by your reckoning? Titus asked, his voice betraying no emotion despite the gravity of the question. 2012, came the reply. If true, this was catastrophic. Not merely a spatial displacement, but temporal as well, before the Imperium, before the Age of Strife, before the fall of the Eldar and the birth of Slaanesh. Before the Emperor had revealed himself to unite Terra. Before chaos had fully manifested in the material universe. Titus's primary mission protocols restructured themselves instantly. If he had truly been cast backward in time to ancient Terra, then his highest duty was clear: preserve the timeline. Any alteration to humanity's cradle world in this era could have catastrophic consequences for the future Imperium. I understand, Titus said finally. I am from what you would consider the far future, approximately the 41st millennium by the imperial calendar. Another, longer silence. Then a different voice, this one carrying the casual confidence of nobility. So you're saying you're a time traveler in oversized blue power armor who fights for some Imperium in the future. I've heard better cover stories from actual aliens. Titus's enhanced hearing detected the voice as coming from outside the containment room, a new arrival speaking to the director rather than addressing him. Directly. I speak only truth, Titus stated firmly. I am Brother Titus Valens, battle brother of the Ultramarines, Chapter's 2nd Company, servant of the God Emperor of mankind. I have no reason to deceive you. The door to the containment chamber slid open. 2 men entered, one dark-skinned with an eye patch, presumably the director who had spoken earlier, and another with a neatly trimmed beard wearing civilian attire that nonetheless appeared to be of high quality. Neither carried visible weapons, though Titus's autosenses detected power signatures from the bearded man's chest, some form of implanted technology. I'm Director Fury, the first man said. This is Tony Stark. Titus inclined his helmet slightly in acknowledgement. You show courage, approaching an Astartes without protection. The one called Stark smirked. Or maybe we're protected in ways you haven't figured out yet, Blue Man Group. Fury raised a hand, silencing his companion. Let's start simple. What exactly is an Ultramarines chapter and an Astartes? Titus considered the question. The knowledge he possessed was not explicitly classified any citizen of Conton Bias. The Imperium would know of the Space Marines, at least in general terms. And if this was truly ancient Terra, then the information would be forgotten long before it could impact the timeline. The Adeptus Astartes are the Emperor's finest warriors, Titus explained. We are transhuman soldiers, created through genetic modification and enhancement to serve as the Imperium's elite fighting force. We are organized into chapters, each with its own traditions and specialties, though all serve the Emperor's will. The Ultramarines are among the first founding chapters, created directly from the gene seed of our Primarch, Robert Guilliman. Stark circled him slowly, eyes narrowed in analytical assessment. So you're saying you're genetically engineered, like Captain America on super steroids? The name meant nothing to Titus, but the concept seemed accurate enough. If this Captain America is a genetically enhanced human warrior, then there are similarities, though the process of creating an Astartes is far more extensive. And this Emperor you keep mentioning, Fury pressed. The God Emperor of mankind is the master of the Imperium, the greatest psyker ever born, and humanity's shield against the darkness of the void. Titus's voice took on a formal, almost ritualistic quality. He sits upon the golden throne on holy terror, his immortal will guiding humanity through the stars. Stark exchanged a glance with Fury, religious fanatic super soldier from the future. Great. Not religious, Titus corrected firmly. Faith in the Emperor is not religion, it is fact. His divine power protects humanity from the predations of the warp. Without his light, mankind would fall to chaos. And chaos is, Fury prompted, the greatest threat to humanity's existence. The ruinous powers of the warp malevolent entities, formed from the worst aspects of sentient emotion and thought. They corrupt, they twist, they destroy. It was against their servants that I fought before being cast into the warp rift. Stark had completed his circuit of Titus and now stood before him again. So you're a super soldier from the future who fights for an immortal emperor against the forces of evil. And you expect us to believe this because… I expect nothing, Titus replied evenly. Belief is irrelevant. I know my purpose and my duty. Currently, that duty is to find a way back to my proper time and place, while ensuring I do not disrupt the flow of history. Fury studied him for a long moment. And if you can't get back? It was a possibility Titus had already calculated. Then I shall serve the Emperor in this time as best I can, by protecting humanity from threats it cannot yet comprehend. The Emperor, Stark noted dryly, who won't be born for thousands of years, according to your own timeline. His physical manifestation, perhaps, Titus acknowledged. But the Emperor has always existed in some form. His divine essence is eternal. Fury and Stark exchanged another look, this one laden with unspoken communication. Finally, Fury spoke again. We're going to need to run some tests, verify your story. Are you willing to cooperate? Titus considered the request. Allowing these primitives to study his gene-enhanced body and his power armor could potentially alter the timeline. However, without their assistance, his chances of returning to the 41st millennium were minimal. A tactical compromise was necessary. I will allow limited examination, Titus said carefully, but I cannot permit any invasive procedures or the disassembly of my war gear. Such technologies are sacred to the Adeptus Mechanicus and protected by ancient pacts. Fair enough. Fury nodded. For now, you'll remain in containment. We'll bring in specialists to continue this conversation. As they turned to leave, Titus spoke once more. Director Fury, one question. Fury paused at the doorway. Go ahead. This world, your Earth, has it encountered beings from beyond its atmosphere, xenospecies or other non-human entities? A flicker of tension crossed Fury's face. Why do you ask? Because if I am truly in humanity's past, Titus said gravely, then you should know that the galaxy is filled with species that would see mankind destroyed. And some may already have found your world. Fury's expression hardened. We've had visitors. Some friendly, some not. Then know this, Titus said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. In my time, humanity has one rule that has ensured its survival. Suffer not the alien to live. The Xenos cannot be trusted. They will say what you wish to hear, promise cooperation and peace, but they will bring only death. This is the truth I have witnessed across hundreds of worlds. Stark's casual demeanor had vanished, replaced by a cold, evaluative stare. So you're not just a religious fanatic super soldier from the future, but a xenophobic one. Perfect. Not xenophobia, Titus corrected. Experience. The Eldar will sacrifice millions of human lives to save a handful of their own. The Orcs live only to fight and conquer. The Tyranids consume everything in their path. The Necrons seek to purge all life from the galaxy. These are not prejudices, but documented facts across 10,000 years of human history. Fury studied him for a long moment before responding. We'll keep that in mind. But on this world, at this time, we judge individuals by their actions, not their species. The door slid shut behind them, leaving Titus alone once more. He remained standing, perfectly still, as his transhuman mind processed everything he had learned. This world was unprepared for the horrors of the universe. They had encountered Xenos, but had not yet learned the bitter lessons that would eventually forge the Imperium's uncompromising stance, and worse, they were vulnerable. If he had been cast through the warp to this time and place, then a tier now existed, however temporary, between this virgin Earth and the nightmare, the realm of chaos. If that tear remained open, or if it had been noticed by the denizens of the Immaterium, Titus began a series of tactical breathing exercises as he initiated a deeper diagnostic of his armor systems. He might be stranded millennia from his chapter, but his duty remained clear. He would protect humanity, even from the naive compassion that might lead to its destruction. The Emperor protects, and so would he. In the laboratory levels below the containment chamber, Tony Stark studied the holographic readouts with growing fascination. The 3D model of Titus's armor rotated slowly in the air before him, layers peeling away as the computer extrapolated its structure from the limited scan data they had been able to obtain. Jarvis, what are we looking at here? Material composition? Unknown, sir, replied the AI's voice. The armor appears to be a ceramic metallic composite unlike anything in our database. Density and tensile strength estimations exceed any known alloy by a factor of at least 15. There are also indications of energy fields permeating the material that resist conventional scanning. Power source? Inconclusive, sir. There appears to be a primary reactor of some kind in the backplate, but its emissions don't match any known energy signature. There are also secondary power nodes distributed throughout the armor that seem to function independently. Bruce Banner looked up from his own workstation, where he had been analyzing the biological readings. Tony, you need to see this. Stark moved to Banner's side, examining the DNA sequence displayed on the screen. That can't be right. Run it again. I've run it 3 times, Banner said, removing his glasses. The genetic structure is fundamentally human, but with extensive modifications, artificial gene sequences spliced in that don't match anything in nature. Extra organs that don't exist in baseline humans, a redundant nervous system, bone density increased by factors of 10, and that's just what I can extrapolate from external scans. Stark whistled low. So he wasn't exaggerating about being transhuman. Not in the slightest, Banner confirmed. Whoever or whatever created him was working with genetic engineering techniques centuries beyond what we're capable of, maybe millennia. So you're buying his story. Time traveler from the year 40,000 whatever? Banner shrugged. I'm just looking at the data, Tony, and the data says he's not like anything we've ever seen. Not Asgardian, not Chitauri, not enhanced human by any method we know. Something else entirely. Director Fury entered the lab, followed closely by Captain Steve Rogers, still in his full Captain America uniform. Rogers's expression was serious as he studied the holographic displays. What do we know? Fury demanded. That we're dealing with technology and bioengineering way beyond our current understanding, Stark replied. His armor makes the Iron Man suit look like a tin can with firecrackers, and his genetic modifications make Cap here look like he took a mild vitamin supplement. Rogers frowned at the comparison but didn't rise to the bait. Is he telling the truth? About being from the future? Can't verify that part, Banner said, but he's definitely not from around here. The energy readings we're still detecting around him match theoretical models for temporal displacement. And the dimensional tear? Fury pressed. Dr. Selvig, who had been quietly working at another station, looked up, still active, though greatly diminished. It's like a wound that's scabbed over but not fully healed. With the right energy input, it could potentially be reopened. From our side, or his? Rogers asked. Either, Selvig replied grimly, or from whatever exists in the space between. Fury turned to Rogers. Captain, you've spoken to Thor. Does any of this match what he's told you about the 9 realms or other dimensions? Rogers shook his head. Nothing specific. Thor mentioned that there are many realms beyond the 9, some so distant and alien that even Asgardians avoid them. But he never described anything like what our visitor talks about, this Imperium or warp. What about his attitude? Fury continued. The religious devotion, the xenophobia. That's what concerns me most, Rogers said frankly. I've seen that kind of fanaticism before, in Hydra, in the Nazis. The belief that their cause justifies any action, no matter how extreme. He talks about this emperor like a god and seems to genuinely believe that all non-humans should be exterminated on principle. If he's from as far in the future as he claims, Banner interjected, we have to consider that his worldview might be shaped by experiences and history we can't comprehend. Maybe in his time, humanity really has been at war with alien species for thousands of years. Or maybe he's the product of some future fascist regime that's twisted human genetics to create the perfect soldier. Stark countered. Either way, I'm not comfortable with him walking around with that mindset and that much firepower. Fury nodded slowly. For now, he stays in containment. We learn what we can, both about him and this dimensional tear. If it poses a threat to Earth, I want options for sealing it permanently. And if he decides he doesn't want to stay in containment? Rogers asked quietly. Fury's expression hardened. Then we find out just how transhuman he really is. Titus knelt in the center of the containment chamber, his bolter placed on the floor before him, his helmet removed and set aside. His eyes were closed, his breathing measured and controlled as he recited the litany of focus. 6 hours had passed since his arrival, and he had used the time to conduct a thorough assessment of his situation and to perform the necessary prayers and meditations required of an Astartes. The door to the chamber slid open, but Titus did not interrupt his ritual. His transhuman senses had already far identified the newcomer by the pattern of his footsteps and the rhythm of his breathing, the one called Steve Rogers, who had briefly observed him earlier but had not entered or spoken. I'm sorry to interrupt, Rogers said, his tone respectful. Titus completed the final verse of the litany before opening his eyes. You have not interrupted, merely joined my presence during prayer. The ritual is complete. He rose to his full height, towering over the human despite Rogers being tall and well built by mortal standards. You are different from the others. Enhanced, though not to the extent of an Astartes. Rogers nodded. I was given a serum during World War II that enhanced my strength, speed, and durability. Nothing compared to what you describe, but more than a normal human. A primitive precursor to the gene seed, perhaps, Titus observed, studying the man with clinical interest. Your enhancements appear stable and well integrated, the work of a skilled genitor. Dr. Erskine, Rogers supplied. He was killed shortly after creating me. The formula died with him. As the Emperor wills, Titus said automatically, such knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands. Rogers's expression tightened slightly. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. Your beliefs about this Emperor and your views on non-humans have some of our people concerned. Titus regarded him impassively. The truth often concerns those not ready to hear it. The Emperor protects humanity because humanity requires protection. The galaxy is filled with horrors beyond mortal comprehension. Without his light, mankind would have perished millennia ago. You speak of this Emperor as if he's a god. He is divine, Titus confirmed. Though in my time, he no longer walks among us in physical form. His mortal body was mortally wounded during the Horus heresy, and he now sits upon the golden throne, his psychic might holding back the tides of the warp, while his consciousness guides humanity through the stars. Rogers crossed his arms, his posture suggesting discomfort with the topic. And the xenophobia? The belief that all aliens should be exterminated? It is not fear that drives the Imperium's stance on Xenos, Titus explained patiently. It is experience. Humanity extended the hand of friendship to alien species during the dark age of technology. Those same species turned on mankind during the age of strife, when warp storms isolated human worlds from one another. They enslaved us, hunted us, used us for food and sport. The Emperor's decree to suffer not the alien to live stems not from hatred, but from the wisdom of bitter experience. But surely there must be some peaceful species, some potential allies. Titus cut him off with a sharp gesture. There are no allies among the Xenos, only temporary convergences of interest. The Eldar may fight alongside humans against chaos or orcs, but they will sacrifice entire human worlds without hesitation if it serves their purposes. The Tau preach their greater good while sterilizing human populations and erasing their cultures. These are not hypotheticals, Rogers. These are documented facts across 10,000 years of galactic history. Rogers studied him thoughtfully. You truly believe this? I have witnessed it, Titus replied simply. I have fought on 100 worlds against a dozen Xeno species. I have seen the atrocities committed by the alien against human populations. This is not belief. It is knowledge. And if you met an alien here, in our time, who had done none of these things, who had helped humanity, even saved lives. Titus's expression hardened. I would judge it by the standards of the Imperium, as is my duty. If it posed no immediate threat and circumstances did not permit proper sanction, I would monitor it for signs of corruption or deception. The Codex Astartes provides flexibility in isolated operations where full compliance cannot be immediately enforced. Rogers nodded, slowly, as if confirming something to himself. Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that you haven't tried to hide your views. Deception serves no purpose, Titus stated. I am what I am, a servant of the Emperor, created to defend humanity against all threats. If your world has indeed made contact with Xeno species, then you would be wise to maintain vigilance. The alien smiles until its teeth are at your throat. As Rogers turned to leave, Titus spoke again. You disapprove of my worldview. Rogers paused at the doorway. I believe in judging individuals by their actions, not their species or origin. I've fought alongside people I was taught to hate, and I've fought against those who look just like me. The uniform and the flag don't tell you everything you need to know about a person's character. A luxury of ignorance, Titus replied without malice. Your world has not yet faced the full horror of what waits among the stars. When it does, such philosophical niceties will seem quaint indeed. After Rogers departed, Titus retrieved his helmet and resealed it to his armor. The conversation had confirmed what he already suspected. These humans, even their enhanced champions, were naive to the true nature of the cosmos. They believed peace with Xenos was possible because they had not yet experienced the full measure of alien treachery. It was not their fault. They lived in humanity's childhood, before the age of strife, before the fall, before the long night, when humanity nearly perished from the galaxy. They could not know what awaited them, but Titus knew. And as he resumed his vigil in the center of the containment chamber, he silently renewed his oath of moment. He would protect these ancestral humans, even from their own ignorance, for as long as fate decreed he remain in this time. The Emperor's will was clear. It always had been. Dr. Eric Selvig's hands trembled as he adjusted the scanning equipment for the 5th time. The readings made no sense, or rather, they made a kind of sense that contradicted everything he thought he knew about quantum physics and dimensional mechanics. Dr. Selvig. Agent Maria Hill's voice broke his concentration. Director Fury is requesting an update. Selvig ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Tell him the anomaly is growing again. Slowly, but definitely growing. Hill's expression tightened. Growing how? The dimensional tear, it's like a wound that didn't heal properly. Every time our visitor moves or his armor activates any of its systems, the energy signature spikes and the tear widens by a fraction of a millimeter. Selvig pointed to a graphical representation on his monitor. It's still localized to the spot where he appeared, but the quantum instability is spreading, and there's something else. He pulled up another display showing wave-like patterns. There's a resonance frequency emanating from the tear. It's not like anything I've ever seen before, not electromagnetic, not gravitational. It's as if the tear is calling to something. Calling to what? Selvig shook his head. I don't know. But the mathematical pattern suggests it's not random. It's a signal of some kind, being transmitted through the dimensional breach. Hill's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm. Could our visitor be causing this deliberately? I don't think so, Selvig replied, though uncertainty crept into his voice. The signal began before he arrived and continues regardless of his actions. It's as if the tear itself is trying to communicate with something on the other side. Or something on the other side is trying to communicate through it, Hill suggested grimly. Selvig nodded reluctantly. That's the more concerning possibility. And there's one more thing. He hesitated, as if reluctant to voice his next thought. The mathematical sequence in the signal, it has a pattern similar to what I observed while studying the Tesseract. Not identical, but with the same underlying structure. Hill stared at him. You're saying there's a connection between this tear and the Tesseract? Not a direct connection, but perhaps they're both accessing the same underlying dimensional fabric. The Tesseract is a doorway to the other end of space. This tear might be a doorway to something else entirely, not just another point in space, but perhaps another reality altogether. Hill was already activating her communicator. Director Fury needs to hear this immediately, and Dr. Banner. If this thing is growing, a sudden alarm cut her off. Red warning lights flashed across Selvig's monitoring equipment as a spike of energy surged through his detectors. It's happening again! Selvig shouted, frantically adjusting controls. Energy spike from the tear, magnitude increasing exponentially. On his monitors, the graphical representation of the dimensional breach flared from a pinpoint to a pulsing circle. Numbers scrolled rapidly across adjacent screens, quantum measurements escalating beyond established parameters. Containment breach imminent. An automated voice announced over the facility's speaker system. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. Hill was already moving, dragging Selvig away from his equipment. We need to get to the secure command center. Now. As they rushed from the laboratory, Selvig cast one final glance at his monitors. The tear was no longer just growing, it was transforming, its energy signature shifting into patterns that defied conventional physics. The breach was no longer merely a passive dimensional anomaly. It was becoming active, becoming intentional, becoming a doorway. And something was coming through. The alarms triggered Titus's combat reflexes instantly. He rose from his meditative posture, bolter in hand, helmet scanning for threats. The primitive security systems in the chamber had shifted to emergency protocols, lights flashing red, automated lockdown procedures engaging. But it wasn't the alarms that truly alerted him. It was the sensation that crawled across his skin, even through his power armor, the unmistakable psychic resonance of the warp. The dimensional breach was reopening, and where the warp touched real space, chaos would inevitably follow. Titus activated his armor's full combat systems, diverting auxiliary power to his defensive fields. The machine spirit of his battleplate responded eagerly, activation runes glowing blue across his tactical display as dormant systems came online. With power reserves at only 37%, he would need to conserve energy, but full combat readiness was non-negotiable. Facility personnel, Titus voxed through his armor's external speakers. The warp breach is expanding. You face imminent demonic incursion. Release me from containment immediately. No response came. Either they could not hear him, or they did not believe him. It made no difference, the threat was real regardless of their understanding. Titus assessed the containment chamber. The walls were sturdy by this era's standards, but would offer minimal resistance to his ceramite-clad fists, especially with his armor's systems fully powered. The observation ports were likely the weakest points. The decision became moot as the chamber door slid open. Steve Rogers stood in the doorway, now fully equipped in his combat uniform, a circular shield bearing primitive nationalist iconography strapped to his arm. "The scientists say the dimensional tier is reopening," Rogers said without preamble. "Is this your doing?" "No," Titus replied immediately. "It is the nature of the warp. Once breached, the barrier between real space and the immaterium weakens. Something is coming through, something that followed my transit." Rogers's expression remained skeptical but urgent. "Fury has ordered full containment protocols, but I convinced him we might need your expertise if this is related to where you came from. You're being granted conditional release, under my supervision." "A wise decision," Titus acknowledged. "Lead on. Time is critical." They moved swiftly through the facility corridors, passing security personnel, establishing defensive positions. Titus noted their weapons and tactics with professional assessment, primitive but organized, though utterly inadequate against what might emerge from the warp. "The tear is in a secure laboratory 3 levels up," Rogers explained as they entered an elevator. "Dr. Selvig detected energy spikes 15 minutes ago. They've been growing exponentially since then." "Has anyone reported visual or auditory hallucinations, unusual behavior among personnel? Changes in temperature or light quality near the breach?" Rogers frowned. "Not that I've heard. Why?" "Warp manifestation often begins with psychic phenomena before physical breaching occurs. The veil thins gradually, allowing the immaterium to leak into real space before full daemonic manifestation." The elevator doors opened onto a scene of controlled chaos. Security personnel were establishing a perimeter around a laboratory entrance, while scientists evacuated with equipment and data storage devices. Stark stood near the laboratory doors in his full armor, the metal gleaming red and gold under the emergency lights. Director Fury and Agent Hill coordinated the response from a mobile command station. "Our guest," Fury acknowledged as they approached, his single eye narrowing. "Captain Rogers vouches that you might be useful in this situation." "Convince me." "The dimensional breach is a tier in reality between your world and what I know as the warp, the immaterium," Titus stated flatly. "It is a realm of psychic energy formed from the collective emotions and thoughts of sentient beings across the galaxy. And it is home to entities your primitive science cannot comprehend." "Primitive?" Stark's helmet retracted, revealing his face. "Our primitive science has been monitoring energy patterns you can't even perceive, without your fancy future armor." "Show me your readings," Titus demanded, ignoring the barb. Fury nodded to Hill, who displayed a holographic representation of the tear. Titus studied it carefully, his genetically enhanced mind processing the data at transhuman speed. "As I suspected," he said finally. "The breach is not simply reopening, it's being forced open from the other side. The energy pattern shows intentional manipulation consistent with warpcraft." "Meaning?" Fury pressed. "Meaning something noticed my transit through the warp and has been trying to follow the trail I left behind. The pattern suggests sentient influence change, manipulation, sorcery." Rogers shook his head in frustration. "In plain English, please." Titus turned to face them directly, his voice carrying the weight of grim certainty. "A daemon is attempting to breach the barrier between dimensions and enter your world. a being of pure warp energy given form and consciousness by the collective psychic emanations of sentient life. They are malevolence incarnate, and they exist only to corrupt, destroy, and dominate. Like Loki and the Chitauri? Stark asked. No, Titus said firmly. The Xenos you faced were physical beings with physical limitations. Daemons are warp entities. They do not obey the physical laws of your universe. They cannot be killed by conventional weapons. Their very presence corrupts both mind and matter, and they hunger for the souls of humanity. A skeptical silence met his words. These humans of ancient terror had not yet experienced the true horror of chaos. They had no frame of reference for what was coming. If you do not believe me, Titus said, then observe for yourselves. But be prepared for what you will witness. As if in response to his words, the laboratory doors slid open. Dr. Selvig emerged, his face pale with terror, followed by several assistants. Behind them, visible through the open doorway, a pulsing light cast impossible shadows on the laboratory walls. It's growing, Selvig gasped. The energy readings are off the charts. And there's something else, some kind of signal coming through, patterns in the quantum fluctuations that seem almost like language, Titus finished for him. The speech of demons, corrupting reality with every syllable. Fury turned to Rogers. Captain, take a team and secure that lab. Stark, Banner, I want containment options now. Containment is impossible, Titus interrupted. Once a daemon manifests in real space, it can only be banished through specific rites or destroyed through weapons designed to harm warp entities. Your technology is insufficient. Then what do you suggest? Fury demanded. Titus checked his bolter's ammunition counter again out of habit, though he already knew it was empty. My power armor contains sacred wards that offer some protection against warp entities. I will enter the breach zone and attempt to disrupt the incursion ritually. The prayers of banishment may be sufficient if the breach is still small. And if they're not? Then your world will witness the true face of chaos for the first time, Titus replied grimly. And you will understand why the Emperor's justice is so absolute. Before Fury could respond, a scream echoed from the laboratory, not pain, but a sound of pure existential terror. One of the technicians who had remained behind staggered into view, his eyes wide, blood streaming from his nose and ears. It's here, he whispered, his voice distorted, before collapsing to the floor. His body began to convulse, spine arching at an impossible angle as his skin rippled with unnatural movement. Possession. Titus identified instantly, raising his bolter despite its lack of ammunition. The daemon is using him as a conduit. The technician's body jerked upright, moving with the jerky, unnatural motion of a puppet. His head rotated too far, bones cracking audibly, as his face split in a smile too wide for human anatomy. When he spoke, multiple voices overlaid in impossible harmonies. The veil is thin here, the thing wearing the technician's body said. So very thin. We have tasted this reality before, but never found such a perfect entry point. Thank you, little angel, for cutting a path for us. Titus stepped forward, placing himself between the possessed human and the others. I name you daemon, and by the Emperor's light, I deny you this realm. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming children. The anathema has no power here, little angel. Not yet. This is before his ascension, before his light burned so bright. This reality is unprotected, ripe for our touch. The possessed human's body began to change, flesh rippling and reforming, bones cracked as limbs elongated. The skin split in places, revealing not blood and muscle but swirling, colorful energies that hurt the eyes to behold. Engage the entity, Titus commanded, charging forward. Focus fire on the host body. Rogers reacted first, his shield flying through the air to strike the transforming creature in the chest. The impact would have shattered normal human ribs, but the daemon merely staggered slightly, its unnatural smile widening further. Stark raised his armored hands, energy building in his palm repulsors. I don't know about daemons, but I bet this thing doesn't like repulsor blasts. Twin beams of energy struck the creature, engulfing it in blue-white light. For a moment, it seemed to shriek in pain, but then the energy was absorbed, drawn into the swirling, impossible colors that now composed most of its form. Primitive technology. The daemon laughed, its voice now completely inhuman. Such delicious ignorance. Your weapons cannot harm what does not truly exist in your reality. Titus reached the creature, his empty bolter swinging in a devastating arc that connected with what had once been the technician's head. Ceramite-clad fist met warped flesh with enough force to decapitate a pure, normal human. The daemon's form distorted around the impact, stretching like viscous liquid before snapping back. "Ah, the angel remembers how to fight," it hissed appreciatively. "But you are far from your emperor's light, little one. And we have been waiting so very long for this moment." A limb that was no longer recognizably human lashed out, striking Titus with impossible speed. His armor's machine spirit screamed warnings as warp energy washed over his protective fields. Ancient wards etched into his ceramite plate flared with blue light, repelling the worst of the corruption, but the physical force still sent him sliding backward. The daemon turned toward the other humans, its form continuing to warp and twist as more of the warp's essence poured into real space through the possessed host. What had once been a human technician now resembled a grotesque parody of humanoid form, limbs too numerous and jointed in impossible ways, flesh swirling with patterns that hurt the mind to perceive, a face that seemed to contain dozens of smaller faces screaming in perpetual agony. "Your minds are so open, so unprotected," it crooned. "Let me show you what awaits beyond the veil." The air around the daemon rippled as reality itself began to warp under its influence. Those nearest to it, Fury, Hill, several security personnel suddenly clutched their heads, faces contorted in horror at whatever visions the daemon was forcing into their minds. "Fall back," Titus shouted. "It's using psychic warfare. Your minds cannot withstand direct contact." Rogers, seemingly less affected than the others, pulled Fury and Hill away from the daemon's immediate vicinity. Stark fired another repulsor blast, this time targeting the floor beneath the creature. Concrete shattered, temporarily destabilizing the daemon's footing. Titus used the momentary distraction to assess the tactical situation. The daemon was still manifesting, still drawing power from the warp breach in the laboratory. Behind it, if he could disrupt that connection or seal the breach somehow. "Stark," he called, "your armor's energy projection capabilities, can they be tuned to match specific frequencies?" "Of course," Stark replied, his helmet snapping back into place. "Jarvis can modulate the repulsor output across the full electromagnetic spectrum." "The breach resonates at a specific frequency," Titus explained rapidly. "If we can generate an inverse wave pattern, we might temporarily disrupt the daemon's connection to the warp. Like noise-canceling headphones for interdimensional tears. Worth a shot." Stark turned toward the laboratory entrance. "Jarvis, analyze the energy signature of the anomaly and prepare a counter-frequency repulsor blast." "Calculating, sir," came the AI's response. Anomaly operating on multiple frequency bands simultaneously, many outside standard detection parameters. The daemon, recovering from the momentary disruption, focused its attention on Titus. "The little angel thinks to close our door," it hissed, "but we have already sent the call across the veil. More are coming. This reality will burn with glorious change." It lunged forward with inhuman speed, multiple limbs striking at Titus simultaneously. His transhuman reflexes allowed him to block some attacks and dodge others, but several connected with his armor. Warning runes flashed across his display as corrupting warp energy tried to penetrate his defenses. Titus countered with a precisely calculated strike to what appeared to be the daemon's center mass. His fist connected with something solid, and for a brief moment, the creature's form solidified enough for him to cause actual damage. The daemon shrieked, a sound that caused nearby glass to shatter and humans to cry out in pain as their eardrums threatened to rupture. "Sir," counter-frequency calculated, Jarvis announced. "However, Full power deployment will drain the arc reactor to critical levels. "Do it," Stark commanded, positioning himself at the laboratory entrance with his arms extended toward the pulsing breach visible inside. "Wait," Titus warned, still grappling with the daemon. "If you disrupt the breach while the daemon is partially manifested, the backlash could—" He had no time to finish as Stark fired. Twin beams of intricately modulated energy struck the dimensional tear, their frequency perfectly calibrated to cancel the warp resonance. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The breach flared with blinding light as the counter-frequency crashed against the warp energies. The daemon released Titus, its form convulsing as the connection to its source was violently disrupted. It screamed not in pain, but in fury as its substance began to unravel at the edges. "Fools!" it shrieked. "You do not sever our connection, you release it." The breach, rather than closing, expanded explosively. Where before it had been a controlled, if growing, tear in reality, now it burst outward like a dam breaking. Warp energy flooded the laboratory and spilled into the corridor beyond, washing over everything in its path. Titus's armor wards flared bright blue as they repelled the worst of the corruption, but even he staggered under the psychic assault. The humans had no such protection. Security personnel collapsed instantly, blood pouring from their eyes and noses as their minds were overwhelmed by direct contact with the raw immaterium. Only Rogers, Stark in his sealed armor, and a few others further from the breach remained conscious, and even they were clearly affected, movements becoming uncoordinated, expressions twisted in horror at whatever they were experiencing. The daemon, rather than being banished, seemed to grow stronger as more warp energy flowed into real space. Its form solidified further, becoming more defined even as it became more inhuman. Multiple eyes blinked open across its surface, each one filled with swirling colors that defied description. Limbs multiplied, some ending in claws, others in writhing tentacles that seemed to phase in and out of reality. "Yes," it exulted, its voice resonating on multiple frequencies simultaneously. "Feed us, little ones. Your fear, your confusion, your desperate hope, all of it strengthens the breach. All of it calls to my brethren beyond the veil." Titus knew they had seconds at most before the situation became completely uncontainable. The warp breach was expanding too quickly, the daemon manifesting too fully. Without proper banishment rites or warp-attuned weapons, they had no means of stopping it. Or did they? His gaze fell on Stark's armor specifically, the glowing circle in its chest, the power source. The energy readings he had detected earlier matched no Imperial technology he was familiar with, but they resonated with a frequency not entirely unlike that used in conversion fields and warp disruption technology. It was a desperate gamble, but no true servant of the Emperor ever yielded to despair. "Stark," Titus called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your armor's primary power source, what energy does it generate?" Stark, struggling to maintain his position against the tide of warp energy, turned toward him. "Arc reactor technology. Clean energy based on palladium fusion with, can it be overloaded?" Understanding dawned in Stark's eyes, visible even through his helmet. "You want to blow up my suit? There are better ways to—" "Not explosion," Titus corrected urgently. "Controlled overload. A pulse of energy directly into the breach, not to close it, but to destabilize the daemon's connection to the warp. It might force the entity back into the immaterium long enough for the breach to naturally collapse." Stark hesitated only briefly. "Jarvis, run the numbers. Can the arc reactor generate a focused energy pulse if pushed beyond safe parameters?" "Yes, sir, but the resulting feedback would likely destroy the reactor and severely damage the suit. Survival, probability for the operator is—" "Skip the odds," Stark interrupted. "Configure for maximum pulse, directed energy projection." "Tony, wait," Rogers called, struggling to approach through the waves of warp energy that now filled the corridor. "There has to be another way." "Always is," Stark replied, his voice strained but determined. "But we don't have time to find it." The daemon, sensing their plan, lunged toward Stark with unnatural speed. "The little Iron Man thinks to banish us? Your primitive science cannot touch the warp." Titus intercepted it, ceramite-clad hands grasping limbs that should not have been graspable. His armor's wards flared brighter as direct contact with the daemon's form tried to corrupt his war gear, but the ancient protective runes held. "For the Emperor!" Titus roared, using all his transhuman strength to hold the daemon in place. "Now, Stark." Stark's armor reconfigured, plates sliding aside as the arc reactor in his chest glowed with increasing intensity. Warning lights flashed across its surface as safety protocols were overridden and power levels pushed far beyond designed parameters. "Jarvis, divert all power to the Unibeam," Stark commanded. "And maybe start writing my eulogy." The daemon thrashed violently in Titus's grasp, its form becoming increasingly unstable as it sensed the impending threat. "This changes nothing," it shrieked. "The veil has been pierced. The path is known. We will return, again and again, until this reality is ours." "Not while I draw breath," Titus growled, his grip tightening even as the daemon's corrupting essence began to eat through his armor's protective wards. The arc reactor reached critical levels, blue-white energy building to an almost unbearable brightness. Stark took aim directly at the heart of the warp breach, visible beyond the laboratory doors. "Fire," Titus commanded. A massive beam of energy erupted from Stark's chest, spearing through the daemon's writhing form and into the dimensional tear beyond. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze: the daemon's thrashing, the swirling warp energies, even the sounds of chaos that had filled the corridor. Then reality reasserted itself with catastrophic force. The daemon's form imploded, collapsing in upon itself as the arc reactor's energy disrupted its connection to the warp. The dimensional breach flared blindingly bright before rapidly contracting. Waves of force radiated outward, throwing everyone except Titus and the heavily armored Stark off their feet. Stark's armor went dark, the arc reactor's light fading as systems shut down. He dropped to one knee, emergency protocols barely keeping minimal life support functioning. Where the daemon had been, nothing remained, not even the remains of the unfortunate technician it had possessed. The warp breach had shrunk to a pinpoint, a barely visible distortion in reality that pulsed weakly. Titus approached it cautiously, his armor's systems registering the decreased warp energy. "The entity has been banished, and the breach is stabilizing. Your gambit was successful, Stark." "Yay, team," came Stark's strained reply as his armor struggled to restart with minimal power. Rogers pulled himself to his feet, helping Fury and the other survivors who had been thrown clear of the worst effects. "Is it over? Is that thing gone?" "For now," Titus confirmed. "But the daemon spoke truth. Once the veil between realities is pierced, it becomes easier for subsequent breaches to occur. This world is now known to the denizens of the warp. They will attempt to return." Fury, bleeding from a cut on his forehead but otherwise functional, surveyed the destruction. "So we've got interdimensional demons added to our threat list. Wonderful. Can they be permanently stopped?" Titus turned to face him, his armor still bearing the corrupting marks of direct contact with a warp entity. "In my time, humanity has developed weapons and rituals specifically designed to combat chaos, holy symbols blessed by the Emperor's psychic might, weapons infused with anti-warp properties, specialized ammunition that disrupts daemonic forms. None of which we have here," Stark noted, his armor finally rebooting enough for him to stand. "No," Titus acknowledged, "but we have something perhaps more valuable. Knowledge. Now you have witnessed the true nature of the threat. You understand what waits beyond the veil of reality." He looked at each of them in turn, Fury with his calculating stare, Rogers with his determined expression, Stark with his damaged but still functioning armor. "And now we prepare," Titus continued, "for this was merely the first incursion. The warp has tasted your reality. It will hunger for more." The remnant of the breach pulsed once more before shrinking to microscopic size, temporarily dormant but not truly gone. In the quiet that followed, emergency systems blaring in the background, Titus began the prayer of vigilance, a ritual taught to all ultramarines for moments when the darkness receded but did not truly depart. The battle was won, but the war had only just begun. Word count so far, 13,256. The days that followed the incursion transformed SHIELD's approach to interdimensional threats. Under Titus's guidance, the remnant breach was contained within a specialized chamber designed according to principles that approximated, in primitive form, the warp containment technologies of the distant future. Fury stood beside Titus, watching through armored glass as technicians completed work on the containment field. "You realize this changes everything. Our entire understanding of the universe, of reality itself." "As it should," Titus replied. "Your world has lived in ignorance of the warp for millennia. That ignorance ends now." "And these daemons, you're certain they'll try again?" Titus nodded solemnly. "The nature of chaos is eternal hunger. The breach may be dormant, but the connection has been established. They will seek other ways to enter your reality, weaker points in the veil, psychically sensitive individuals they can influence or possess, objects or locations where the barrier between dimensions naturally thins." Rogers joined them, carrying a tablet displaying images of the recovered debris from the laboratory. "Doctor, Banner has been analyzing the residual energy patterns. He says they don't match anything in our scientific understanding." "They wouldn't," Titus confirmed. "The warp defies your physics because it operates according to different laws entirely. It is shaped by consciousness, by emotion, by belief. It is the collective psychic imprint of all sentient life given form and substance." Stark entered, his arc reactor once again functioning though dimmer than before. The sacrifice of power had not been without cost. "So these daemons, they're what? The physical manifestations of our collective bad thoughts." "An oversimplification, but essentially correct," Titus said. "The ruinous powers, the gods of chaos, each embody specific aspects of sentient emotion and desire. Khorne feeds on rage and bloodshed, Nurgle on despair and disease, Slanesh on excess and sensation, Tzeentch on ambition and change. The daemon we encountered bore the marks of Tzeentch, the changer of ways." "And your emperor?" Rogers asked carefully. "Where does he fit into this cosmology?" Titus's expression remained impassive, but his voice carried deep conviction. "The Emperor is humanity's shield against the predations of the warp. His psychic might holds back the tides of chaos that would otherwise consume mankind. In my time, he sits upon the golden throne, his mortal body preserved but broken, his divine consciousness extending across the galaxy to protect humanity. But in our time," Fury noted, "this Emperor doesn't exist yet. At least, not as you describe him." "Perhaps," Titus acknowledged. "Or perhaps he walks among you even now, in human form, preparing for the day when he will reveal himself and unite Terra before the Great Crusade. The Emperor's origins are shrouded in mystery, even in my era." Stark rolled his eyes. "Great. So we might have Space Jesus wandering around Earth right now, and we wouldn't even know it." Titus's gaze hardened. "Mock, if you will, Stark, but your world now faces threats against which conventional weapons and scientific understanding offer little protection. Faith may prove more valuable than you realize in the coming darkness." "Faith didn't stop that thing," Stark countered. "A strategically overloaded arc reactor did. Your technology merely disrupted its connection to the warp temporarily," Titus corrected. "Without proper banishment rites or warp-attuned weapons, the daemon was merely forced back, not destroyed. It waits still, beyond the veil, seeking another opportunity to cross over." The conversation was interrupted as Dr. Selvig entered the observation area, his expression grave. "Director Fury, we're detecting new energy fluctuations, not from the contained breach, but from elsewhere in the city." Fury's eye narrowed. "Where?" Selvig handed him a tablet displaying a map with a pulsing red indicator. "Grand Central Terminal. The energy signature is different from before, weaker, more diffuse, but with similar quantum characteristics." He said they'd find other ways in, Rogers noted grimly. Titus studied the data on the tablet. The pattern suggests a naturally occurring thin point in the veil rather than a forced breach. The presence of large crowds experiencing stress, fear, or other strong emotions can sometimes create weak spots that warp entities can exploit. A major transportation hub during rush hour, Stark observed. Thousands of frustrated, angry commuters, perfect daemon bait, apparently. We need to move, Fury decided. Full containment team, Code Indigo protocols. And our resident expert, he added, nodding to Titus. I will accompany your forces, Titus agreed. But understand this, incursion will be different from the last. The warp adapts, it learns. Each manifestation will present new challenges. As they moved to depart, Stark activated his armor, the damaged arc reactor glowing with reduced but stable output. So, what's the plan? Hit it with another energy pulse if it shows up? No, Titus replied, checking his bolter, still without ammunition, but SHIELD. Technicians had crafted crude approximations of bolter rounds based on his specifications. They would be less effective than true bolt ammunition, but better than nothing. The warp will have adapted to that tactic. We must be prepared for new strategies, new forms of manifestation. Rogers secured his shield to his arm. Whatever comes through, we'll face it together. Titus regarded the human with measured respect. For all their ignorance, these ancestors showed courage worthy of the Imperial Guard. Indeed, the Emperor protects, Captain Rogers. But he expects us to fight his battles with all our strength and conviction. As they boarded the transport that would take them to the new incursion site, Titus recited the litany of battle silently. The daemon's words echoed in his memory. The veil has been pierced, the path is known. This world was now marked by chaos, its reality tasted by the denizens of the warp. And he, alone Astartes lost in time, stood as its first and perhaps only true defender against the darkness that had pursued mankind across the stars for millennia to come. The Emperor had placed him here, in humanity's past, for a purpose. Of that, Titus was certain. And he would not fail in his sacred duty, no matter what horrors emerged from the tear in reality. For in the grim darkness of the future from which he came, there was only war. And now, that war had reached humanity's ancient past.